Unveiling the Shadows' Western Influence in Post-Soviet States. The fall of the Soviet Union marked a pivotal moment in history, ushering in an era of newfound independence for many nations across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. As these newly independent states navigated the complex transition from Soviet rule, the West, led by the United States and its allies, emerged as a dominant force, shaping the political, economic, and social landscapes of these countries. This period witnessed a wave of reforms aimed at democratizing political systems, liberalizing economies, and promoting human rights, all guided by the principles and values espoused by Western democracies. However, the path to democratic consolidation and economic prosperity proved to be far more intricate and arduous than initially anticipated. The legacy of Soviet rule, coupled with the challenges of nation-building and the emergence of new geopolitical realities, created a fertile ground for corruption, cronyism, and authoritarian backsliding. Amidst these complexities, the role of the West in influencing the trajectory of post-Soviet states has come under increasing scrutiny, with critics pointing to the gap between rhetoric and reality in the West's engagement with these countries. This video delves into the multifaceted and often contradictory nature of Western influence in post-Soviet states. Drawing upon a range of sources, including academic studies, investigative reports, and policy analyses, this video seeks to provide a nuanced understanding of the West's engagement with these countries, highlighting both the successes and shortcomings of its approach. By critically examining the interplay between Western intentions, local realities, and the unintended consequences of policy interventions, this video aims to contribute to a more informed and balanced debate on the West's role in shaping the post-Soviet space. The allure and illusion of Western engagement. The allure of the West, with its promises of democracy, prosperity, and integration into the global order, held a strong appeal for many post-Soviet states. Western governments and institutions actively encouraged this aspiration, offering financial aid, technical assistance, and a path to membership in international organizations such as the European Union and NATO. This engagement, however, was often driven by a combination of strategic interests, ideological agendas, and economic considerations, creating a complex web of relationships that did not always align with the stated goals of promoting democracy and human rights. One of the key challenges in assessing Western influence in post-Soviet states stems from the inherent asymmetry of power between these actors. The West, with its economic might, political clout, and global reach, often held a position of leverage in its dealings with these newly independent nations, eager for recognition, investment, and security guarantees. This power imbalance created opportunities for exploitation, as Western actors, both state and non-state, sought to advance their own interests, often at the expense of the long-term well-being of the countries they claimed to be assisting. The collapse of the Soviet Union also coincided with the rise of globalization, characterized by the free flow of capital, goods, and services across national borders. While globalization presented new opportunities for economic growth and integration, it also created vulnerabilities, particularly for countries with weak governance structures and underdeveloped institutions. The rapid privatization of state assets, often under pressure from international financial institutions, created opportunities for corruption and cronyism, as well as the emergence of oligarchic structures that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of a select few, often with close ties to Western businesses and political circles. Unmasking the enablers' Western actors in the shadows. The narrative of Western influence in post-Soviet states often focuses on the actions of governments and official institutions, overlooking the role of private actors, such as multinational corporations, financial institutions, and individuals in shaping the political and economic landscapes of these countries. These actors, operating within a globalized system characterized by deregulation, tax havens, and a culture of impunity, found ample opportunities to exploit the weak regulatory frameworks and nascent democratic institutions of post-Soviet states, often with the tacit complicity or even active support of Western governments. The Panama Papers, a massive leak of financial documents in 2016, provided a stark illustration of the extent to which Western enablers facilitated illicit financial flows from post-Soviet states. The documents revealed how law firms, banks, and other intermediaries in Western financial centers such as London, New York, and Geneva helped corrupt officials, oligarchs, and criminals from the former Soviet Union to hide their wealth, evade taxes, and launder their ill-gotten gains. These revelations highlighted the hypocrisy of Western governments that preach transparency and accountability, while turning a blind eye to the activities of their own citizens and institutions that facilitated corruption and kleptocracy abroad. The case of the UK's property market is particularly illustrative of this phenomenon. Despite its reputation as a bastion of financial transparency, the UK became a magnet for dirty money from Russia and other former Soviet republics. Opaque ownership structures, lax regulations, and a culture of discretion in the real estate sector allowed individuals with questionable sources of wealth to purchase luxury properties in London and other major cities, often using shell companies registered in offshore tax havens. This influx of illicit funds not only distorted the UK's property market, driving up prices and exacerbating inequality, but also raised concerns about the potential for political influence and money laundering. The price of transition, economic reforms, and their discontents. The transition from centrally planned to market-based economies was a defining feature of the post-Soviet experience. Guided by Western advisors and institutions, countries across the region embarked on ambitious programs of privatization, deregulation, and trade liberalization. These reforms aimed to attract foreign investment, promote economic growth, and create a more efficient and competitive private sector. However, the implementation of these reforms was often flawed, leading to unintended consequences that undermined their stated objectives and exacerbated existing inequalities. One of the most contentious aspects of economic transition was the privatization of state-owned enterprises. While privatization held the promise of increased efficiency and innovation, it also created opportunities for corruption and asset stripping on a massive scale. In many cases, former Communist Party officials, well-connected businessmen, and criminal elements were able to acquire valuable state assets at below-market prices, often through rigged auctions or insider deals. This resulted in the concentration of wealth in the hands of a small elite, while ordinary citizens often saw their living standards decline as state-owned industries were dismantled and social safety nets were weakened. The rapid liberalization of trade and investment regimes also exposed post-Soviet economies to the vagaries of global markets. While some countries, such as those with abundant natural resources, benefited from increased exports, others struggled to compete in the global marketplace, leading to deindustrialization, unemployment, and a decline in real wages. The influx of foreign goods and capital also contributed to the erosion of local industries and cultures, as Western brands and consumption patterns flooded the newly opened markets. Between principle and pragmatism, navigating the ethical quagmire. The West's engagement with post-Soviet states has often been characterized by a tension between its stated commitment to democratic values and its pursuit of strategic and economic interests. This tension is perhaps most evident in the realm of economic policy, where the push for market reforms has sometimes come at the expense of democratic principles and human rights. The question of how to balance these competing objectives has been a source of ongoing debate and controversy. On the one hand, proponents of a more pragmatic approach argue that the West should prioritize stability and economic growth over the promotion of democracy, particularly in countries with weak democratic traditions and a history of authoritarian rule. They argue that rapid democratization can lead to instability and create opportunities for extremist groups to exploit popular grievances. Moreover, they contend that economic development is a prerequisite for democratic consolidation, as it creates a more educated and prosperous middle class that can demand greater political freedoms. On the other hand, critics of this approach argue that it is both morally wrong and strategically counterproductive to sacrifice democratic values in the pursuit of short-term stability or economic gain. The West's tarnished image perceptions of hypocrisy and double standards. The West's self-proclaimed role as a champion of democracy and human rights has often been called into question in the context of its engagement with post-Soviet states. While Western governments and institutions frequently emphasize the importance of these values in their rhetoric, their actions have sometimes fallen short of their words, fueling perceptions of hypocrisy and double standards. This disconnect between rhetoric and reality has eroded trust and undermined the West's credibility in the eyes of many in the region. One source of this perception stems from the West's selective application of democratic principles in its foreign policy. While the West has been quick to condemn human rights abuses and democratic backsliding in countries deemed to be adversaries or rivals, it has often been more lenient towards similar transgressions by regimes viewed as allies or partners, particularly when strategic or economic interests are at stake. This inconsistency has led to accusations that the West applies a double standard, prioritizing its own national interests over its commitment to universal values. Furthermore, the West's historical legacy of colonialism, imperialism, and interventionism in other parts of the world has cast a long shadow over its engagement with post-Soviet states. Many in the region view the West's promotion of democracy and human rights as a thinly veiled attempt to impose its own values and systems on societies with different histories, cultures, and traditions. This skepticism is compounded by the fact that Western powers have often supported authoritarian regimes in the past, particularly during the Cold War, when they were seen as bulwarks against Soviet expansionism. The limits of moral authority, rethinking the West's role. The challenges facing the West's engagement with post-Soviet states raise fundamental questions about the limits of its moral authority and the effectiveness of its current approach. The West's ability to promote democracy and human rights abroad is inextricably linked to its own domestic politics and its willingness to live up to its own values at home. Hypocrisy and double standards, whether perceived or real, undermine the West's credibility and give ammunition to those who seek to discredit its message. Moreover, the West must recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all model of democracy, and that imposing Western-style institutions on societies with different histories, cultures, and traditions is unlikely to succeed. A more effective approach would be to support locally driven initiatives that reflect the specific needs and aspirations of each country, even if those initiatives do not perfectly align with Western ideals. Finally, the West must acknowledge that its engagement with post-Soviet states cannot be solely focused on promoting democracy and human rights. Economic development, security cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges are all essential components of a comprehensive and sustainable approach. By pursuing a more balanced and nuanced strategy, the West can build stronger and more mutually beneficial relationships with the countries of the former Soviet Union.